Stop whatever you are doing, because what you are about to hear is not a drill, not a simulation, and not the kind of geopolitical speculation that gets walked back by morning. Within the last 72 hours, the Islamic Republic of Iran and Hezbollah have executed a coordinated military operation of such unprecedented scale, such devastating precision, and such catastrophic strategic consequence that every assumption about Middle Eastern power balance has just been permanently obliterated. The numbers are not estimates. They are confirmed operational realities. 10,000 rockets, 2,000 unmanned aerial vehicles, 48 hours of sustained, synchronized, overwhelming firepower that has pushed the Israeli defense establishment to a threshold nobody in Tel Aviv ever believed possible. This is not another border skirmish. This is not another tit-for-tat escalation. This is the moment when deterrence itself collapsed, when Iron Dome mathematics broke down, when the entire architecture of Israeli air superiority faced systematic annihilation. Tonight, the word surrender has entered official Israeli communications for the first time in the nation's history. If this channel has been giving you the analysis that cuts through the noise of official narratives and mainstream defense commentary, now is the moment to make sure you never miss an update. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with everyone in your network who is serious about understanding what is actually happening at the sharp edge of global power competition. The coordinated strike began at 0400 hours local time with a simultaneous launch sequence that stretched from southern Lebanon through the Bekaa Valley, from Iranian bases in western Iraq through Syrian territory, creating a 360-degree assault geometry that no defensive architecture on Earth was designed to counter. Hezbollah forces initiated the northern axis with salvo launches from prepared positions that Israeli intelligence had identified but could never fully neutralize. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps elements activated the eastern axis with precision-guided systems that had been pre-positioned over 18 months of systematic infiltration. The synchronization was absolute. The timing was flawless. The volume was mathematically designed to overwhelm every intercept capacity, every radar processing limit, every reload cycle constraint that Israeli air defense operates under. Within the first 6 minutes, Iron Dome batteries from Haifa to Ashkelon entered saturation mode, firing interceptors at maximum cycle rate against target streams exceeding their design specifications by factors of 4, by factors of 6, by factors that made the system architecture irrelevant. The southern batteries exhausted their primary magazines within 18 minutes. The northern batteries maintained intercept operations for 23 minutes before ammunition depletion forced defensive stand-down. David's sling systems, designed for medium-range ballistic threats, processed more simultaneous tracks than their radar arrays could discriminate, degrading intercept probability below operational effectiveness thresholds. Arrow 3 batteries, reserved for strategic threats against Iran's ballistic arsenal, found themselves engaging tactical rockets because nothing else remained in Israeli defensive inventory. The drone component represented an innovation in saturation warfare that Western defense planners had theorized but never confronted operationally. 2,000 unmanned platforms operating across 3 altitude bands, mixing expendable decoy drones with explosive-laden strike platforms, forcing Israeli air defense to make impossible targeting prioritization decisions. Shoot the high-altitude surveillance drones gathering targeting data and ignore the low-altitude strike drones carrying warheads? Engage the strike drones and accept that Iranian controllers maintain perfect battlefield awareness? The mathematics offered no winning option. Every choice traded one catastrophic outcome for another. Israeli Air Force scrambled every available F-35I Adir and F-16I Sufa airframe in the combat inventory, launching intercept sorties at rates that exceeded peacetime training cycle recommendations, that pushed pilot fatigue beyond safe operating parameters, that burned through spare parts inventories faster than logistics chains could sustain. The fighter aircraft achieved individual engagement success, destroying dozens of drones, dozens of rockets in boost phase. But the numbers were merciless. For every target destroyed, 7 more crossed into Israeli airspace. For every successful intercept, 12 more platforms saturated different defensive sectors. The Israeli Air Force was not failing. It was mathematically overwhelmed by volume that made individual capability irrelevant. By hour 12, the pattern was undeniable. This was not a finite assault designed to deliver a discrete message. This was sustained bombardment calculated to exhaust, to deplete, to force strategic recalculation through relentless pressure that offered no operational pause, no reload window, no tactical breathing space. Hezbollah had prepared for this moment with a decade of systematic stockpile accumulation, with deep underground storage complexes that Israeli airstrikes had never fully penetrated, with distributed launch infrastructure that made targeting impossible without civilian casualty levels that would trigger international intervention. Iran had engineered this moment with 18 months of covert positioning, moving components through Iraq in civilian truck convoys, assembling systems in Syrian facilities protected by Russian air defense coverage, creating launch capacity on Israel's borders that multiplied Hezbollah's organic capabilities by factors that transformed the strategic equation. The coordination was not just tactical synchronization. It was strategic integration where Iranian precision-guided systems provided targeting data, Iranian electronic warfare platforms degraded Israeli radar effectiveness, Iranian logistics networks sustained Hezbollah launch rates at levels the movement could never achieve independently. The first 24 hours produced more Iron Dome intercept attempts than the system had fired in its entire operational history combined. More F-35 combat sorties than Israeli pilots had flown in the previous 18 months. More air defense ammunition expenditure than the Israeli Defense Forces Logistics Command had projected for a sustained 3-month conflict. The depletion was not theoretical. It was absolute. By hour 30, Israeli air defense faced the reality that no modern military has ever confronted: complete ammunition exhaustion across an entire integrated defensive architecture while the attack was still actively ongoing. The targets were not random. Iranian intelligence had provided Hezbollah with precision coordinates for every critical infrastructure node, every military logistics hub, every communication relay, every power generation facility that Israeli civilian society depends upon. The targeting selection revealed intelligence penetration that shocked Israeli security establishment. Rockets struck backup power facilities that were classified locations. Drones impacted ammunition storage sites that were never publicly acknowledged. The strike planning demonstrated knowledge of Israeli critical infrastructure that could only come from years of systematic intelligence collection, from human sources embedded at levels that compromise operational security fundamentally. The damage assessment numbers remain classified, but fragmentary reporting indicates destruction across hundreds of facilities, infrastructure damage exceeding anything Israel has absorbed since the Yom Kippur War, civilian casualties reaching 4 figures despite shelter protocols that were supposed to prevent mass fatalities. The Israeli government has implemented total information blackout on actual impact assessment, but the electromagnetic signature analysis, the satellite thermal imaging, the seismic monitoring data all tell the same story. This was not harassing fire. This was systematic infrastructure destruction executed with precision that transformed quantity into devastating quality. The Iron Dome intercept rate, which Israeli officials claimed exceeded 90% in previous conflicts, collapsed to somewhere between 40 and 60% as ammunition depletion forced rationing decisions, as simultaneous target loads exceeded processing capacity, as system degradation from sustained operations reduced radar effectiveness. David's sling achieved intercept rates below 50% against medium-range threats it was specifically designed to counter. Arrow 3 never engaged because no strategic ballistic missiles were launched. The entire billion-dollar upper-tier defensive architecture sat idle, while tactical systems were overwhelmed at lower tiers. The defensive design assumed hierarchical threat streams that could be addressed sequentially. The coordinated assault delivered simultaneous saturation across all tiers, breaking the architecture through strategy rather than superior technology. By hour 36, Israeli military communications contained phrases that have never appeared in operational traffic. Requests for immediate ceasefire. Discussions of acceptable terms. Acknowledgement that continued operations would deplete remaining defensive ammunition to levels that would leave the nation defenseless against any subsequent attack. The word that appeared in classified communications between Israeli Defense Force Southern Command and political leadership was surrender. Not the formal capitulation that ends wars, but the operational acknowledgement that continued fighting serves no strategic purpose when defensive capacity has been functionally eliminated. The international response has been paralysis masked as deliberation. The United States faces impossible mathematics. Replenishing Israeli air defense inventories requires ammunition that American forces need for their own defensive requirements. That production capacity cannot manufacture fast enough to matter in operationally relevant timeframes. That logistics networks cannot deliver before additional Iranian Hezbollah assaults could be launched. Every interceptor transferred to Israel is an interceptor unavailable for American forces facing potential confrontation with China, with Russia, with North Korea. The zero-sum calculation offers no solutions that serve all interests simultaneously. European allies issue statements of support that commit to nothing actionable, that provide diplomatic backing without military substance, that reflect the fundamental reality that European military inventories are already depleted from Ukraine transfers and cannot sustain Israeli defensive needs without compromising their own territorial defense requirements. The public solidarity masks private calculations that Israel's strategic exposure is a problem that European militaries cannot solve, even if political will existed. Arab states watch with satisfaction that they carefully do not express publicly, seeing the nation that has militarily dominated the region for 70 years reduced to begging for ceasefires, acknowledging that the axis of resistance has achieved what combined Arab armies never accomplished. The quiet recalibrations in Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, in Cairo reflect new understanding that Israeli military superiority is not the permanent feature of regional order that decades of dominance suggested. The hedging behaviors, the quiet communications to Tehran, the diplomatic repositioning all signal recognition that power balance has shifted in ways that demand strategic adaptation. Russia observes with strategic satisfaction as American attention concentrates on Middle Eastern crisis management, as resources flow toward Israeli support rather than Ukrainian sustainment, as the multinational coalition supporting Ukraine faces new demands that stretch already inadequate capacities beyond breaking points. Every percentage point of American strategic bandwidth consumed by Israeli crisis response is a percentage point not available for Ukraine, for NATO eastern flank, for Pacific deterrence architecture. The pressure relief across every theater where Russia faces American-backed opposition is the strategic dividend that makes Iranian success inherently valuable to Russian interests, regardless of bilateral coordination. China analyzes with clinical precision how American alliance commitments create strategic exposure, how defensive ammunition stockpiles prove inadequate for sustained high-intensity conflict, how industrial-based limitations prevent rapid capacity reconstitution, how simultaneous crisis response across multiple theaters reveals force structure inadequacies that careful peacetime planning concealed. The lessons being absorbed in Beijing about American vulnerability to coordinated multi-theater pressure will shape Chinese strategic planning for decades. Iran has demonstrated capabilities that rewrite regional power calculus permanently. The ability to coordinate with non-state actors at scale and precision that matches state military operations. The intelligence penetration that enables targeting of classified Israeli facilities. The strategic patience to position forces over 18 months while maintaining operational security against Israeli intelligence services. The industrial capacity to manufacture and stockpile weapons volumes sufficient to overwhelm First World air defense systems. Every element of this operation signals that Iran has crossed thresholds into capabilities that transform it from regional nuisance to genuine peer competitor capable of conventional military operations at scales that challenge Israeli superiority fundamentally. Hezbollah has evolved from guerrilla force to quasi-state military, with operational capabilities exceeding most national armies, with arsenal depth that rivals medium powers, with coordination abilities that reflect professional military staff planning rather than militia operations. The transformation has been visible for years, but this operation provides definitive proof that Hezbollah can execute corps-level sustained operations with effectiveness that makes the movement a strategic threat rather than tactical problem. The munitions expenditure during this 48-hour window represents industrial output that required years of production, months of covert distribution, weeks of tactical positioning. The replacement timeline for Israeli defensive stocks extends across quarters, across years for some systems. The asymmetry is devastating. Iranian industrial base can reconstitute Hezbollah arsenal faster than Western industrial capacity can rebuild Israeli defenses. The cost-exchange ratios are catastrophic. Each interceptor costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Each rocket costs thousands. The mathematics of attrition warfare favor the attacker by margins that make sustained defense economically impossible even before ammunition depletion becomes the limiting factor. The targeting database that enabled precision strikes against classified facilities represents intelligence collection that likely involved penetration of Israeli security services, suborning of personnel with facility access, years of systematic information gathering that created comprehensive understanding of Israeli critical infrastructure. The counterintelligence implications are existential. If Iranian intelligence can identify and target facilities that are classified secrets, then no Israeli military asset, no critical infrastructure, no command facility can be assumed secure. The compromise is not isolated failure. It is systematic penetration that questions whether Israeli security establishment can protect anything. The strategic implications extend beyond immediate battle damage into fundamental questions about Israeli viability. The nation's existence depends on military superiority that compensates for geographic vulnerability, demographic disadvantage, permanent hostile encirclement. That superiority has been demonstrated as contingent rather than permanent, defeatable through volume rather than unbeatable through quality, vulnerable to systematic pressure that Western industrial base cannot relieve rapidly enough to prevent catastrophic exposure windows. The political consequences inside Israel are already manifesting. Emergency cabinet sessions running through nights, military political confrontations about whose intelligence failures enabled this disaster, public protests demanding explanations for why billions spent on air defense could not prevent systematic infrastructure destruction. The government faces impossible choices between acknowledging strategic defeat or continuing operations that will exhaust remaining defensive capacity and leave the nation defenseless against subsequent attacks. The ceasefire negotiations reveal power dynamics that would have been unthinkable 72 hours ago. Israel requesting terms rather than dictating them. Hezbollah and Iran setting conditions rather than accepting ultimatums. The reversal is total. The nation that has ended every previous conflict on its own terms is now begging for cessation on any terms that stop the bombardment before complete defensive collapse. What happens when deterrence itself has been deterred? When the nation whose military superiority has prevented regional war for decades can no longer credibly threaten retaliation because its defensive systems cannot protect it from response? When adversaries have demonstrated ability to inflict catastrophic damage regardless of Israeli technological advantages? The answers reshape not just regional order but fundamental assumptions about military power, about technological superiority, about the viability of small states surrounded by hostile populations regardless of qualitative military edge. The American security guarantee that has underwritten Israeli security faces its moment of truth. Can the United States replenish Israeli defenses fast enough to matter when its own stockpiles are depleted, when its industrial base cannot surge production, when its attention is divided across Ukraine, across potential Taiwan crisis, across Iranian nuclear breakout timeline that this operation may be creating space for? The limitations are not hypothetical. They are concrete constraints that make promises without substance. This channel has been tracking the evolution of Iranian capabilities, the transformation of Hezbollah, the systematic preparation for this moment, while mainstream analysis dismissed the threat as manageable. If you want analysis this sharp, this deep, this willing to challenge official narratives that age poorly within hours, subscribe now to ensure you never miss an update. The unfolding crisis is not over. The next 48 hours will determine whether Israel accepts terms or continues operations that may exhaust defensive capacity entirely. The world is witnessing the permanent end of Israeli military dominance, the emergence of Iranian-led resistance axis as peer competitor, the collapse of deterrence architecture that has prevented regional war for decades. The implications extend across every dimension of global order. American hegemony faces another failure it cannot reverse. Regional powers see opportunity where American guarantees prove hollow. The multipolar transition accelerates through another demonstration that concentrated power can be overwhelmed by coordinated resistance, that technological superiority cannot compensate for ammunition depletion, that industrial base capacity determines sustained conflict outcomes more than individual weapon system quality. Tonight, history has delivered its verdict. The era of unchallenged Israeli military superiority is over. The resistance axis has capabilities that make future confrontations unacceptable regardless of who wins tactically. The mathematics of attrition have shifted permanently in directions that favor those willing to absorb costs, to rebuild patiently, to strike when defensive exhaustion creates windows that technological advantage cannot close. Subscribe to this channel because in a world this dangerous, analysis this sharp is not optional, it is necessary. Share this breakdown with everyone who needs to understand what actually just happened, not what official briefings will claim. The next phase of Middle Eastern transformation is beginning. The question is not whether power has shifted, but whether anyone in Washington understands how completely the landscape has changed. Your engagement keeps this work independent and sharp. Drop your assessment in the comments. Has this operation permanently altered regional power balance, or will Israel find a path to reconstitute deterrence? Stay sharp, stay ahead, and never stop asking the questions that matter.